Welcome to the Hanu Health Podcast, where our mission is to help you to breathe better and stress less. On this show, we discuss a variety of topics and provide practical suggestions for improving health and well-being. However, none of the education, tips, and tricks provided should be taken as medical advice. Your medical doctor is your best bet if you have medical questions. Also, on this podcast, we interview numerous guests from diverse backgrounds, interests, and may carry some unique ideas. Hanu Health as a company does not endorse all statements provided by guests or condone all suggestions or protocols discussed. We just like hearing about cool people doing rad and new things. So sit back, relax, breathe, and enjoy the show. Dr. Will Wallace, or Dr. William Wallace, because I like saying William Wallace, because it's obviously an epic name, which we're going to talk about here in a second. Dude, welcome to the Hanu Health Podcast, man.
No, thank you very much for having me. It's actually, I just finished my doctorate this year, so when I was like in the heat thank you. When I was in the heat of finishing my dissertation, I was turning down podcasts for like 8 months to a year, so it's actually kind of nice to get into it again.
Oh man, dude, I totally relate with that, but it gives me a tad bit of like trauma / PTSD, like a reminder, because like I tried to dissociate like everything, like in regards to like the last year of completing my doctoral program, because when I was completing my dissertation, like it was 80 to 100 hour weeks, like every week, and I was like crossing my fingers that I was going to get stuff done. Please tell me that your experience was better than that, which it sounds like it may not have been.
Oh my God, no, I don't think that mine was much better, because I also had, all of these work commitments on the side that for whatever reason, I just felt like it was necessary to adhere to or make myself responsible for. Now, I think until it was over, I think every day you're literally, all you're thinking about is that day, because when you look at the totality of what has to get done, you're like, there's no way in hell I'm going to complete this. So you basically just get to the finish line by taking one small step at a time, and every step seems so terribly arduous.
Yeah, dude, it's so funny how much I relate to that. I finished my doctoral degree. I guess that's close to 6 years now. So it's been a while that I've been practicing, but it feels like it was yesterday. And my wife, like, she tries to dissociate from it as well, because she just remembers like the amount of chaotic time that it took away from me. Because kind of similar to you, I had so many other commitments because I was completing residency and doing all of that work. So it's kind of like the balance of clinical work and then also research and publication. It was just it was a massive, head implode / explode. It was both at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I feel you there. It's like I tell people there are two things in my life that I basically dissociated from. One would be my dissertation, and the other's like my wedding. And that's not a bad thing. My wife's going to listen to this and be like, what in the world are you talking about? It's just like there's so much chaos and so much that's going on. You're just like, dude, muscle through it, grit, go, because otherwise I'm just going to smack you. But all in all, the net here is congrats, my man. Like, that is an epic feat that not many people make. And a lot of people, as you know, start the process and don't finish it. So, dude, you got to the finish line, and now you're busting chops, which is awesome. So congrats to you, man.
All right, thank you very much. I would say hopefully it's smooth sailing, but so far things have just, I think, proven to ramp up a little bit more than I anticipated after it was over, but all good things.
Yeah, all good things, which is great. They told me that too. They're like, thanks, life is going to get a lot smoother. It's going to be an easier, slower pace of life once you're done with your doctoral work. No. Yeah, they all lied. Like, what kind of life are they living? And a lot of these people were people who completed it. I'm like, maybe things were for you, but not for me. So yeah, I fully understand.
It doesn't slow down for the ambitious, no.
No. Good point. No, I like that. I'll use that one next time in my dinner conversations with other psychologists who try to tell me the same thing. Yeah, got one for you. So that's great, man. Okay, let's go ahead and squash this big elephant that's in the room, just because I've been wanting to ask you this like so bad.
Yeah.
Your name is epic. It's Dr. William Wallace. So I wanted to know, like, when were you born? Like, were your parents like huge Braveheart fans? Are they Scottish? Like, or is there like no connection there? Yeah, you have to get asked this like all the time.
So there's a connection by happenstance, but my family is Scottish. Like, we have the same Wallace family crest, and the family plaid matches up. But I was born in 1991, and Braveheart.
4 years prior.
Yeah, it didn't come out until 1995. And so before that,
own it.
Yeah, before that, I mean, how many people actually knew the story?
Right. Yep.
I was actually named. I was named after my father's best friend at the time, and then 4 years later, Braveheart comes out, and then now I can, for the past 20 years of my life, can rarely meet somebody without it being brought up.
I know. I figured you would. I was like, I'm probably going to annoy him by bringing this up. But, I have to. Because I hadn't heard this story yet. And that's just awesome. I was like, he's probably, he's Scottish or his parents were, super big Braveheart fans. Or they're Scottish and there are Braveheart fans. But, hey, listen, Braveheart aside, 1991, you own the name. The real Sir William Wallace actually owned the name prior to you. So you can't get your head too big on that one. But you can say it wasn't because of the movie, which is
the difficult part about all it definitely doesn't annoy me. It kind of just comes with the territory, so you take it on the chin.
True.
But the biggest hurdle I think to the name is so much so that I've made it a life goal for myself that if I can somehow work myself into a position or do enough quality work over the course of my life to where if you type in William Wallace into Google, if I appear on the first 3 to 5 pages of a Google search, I will have considered my life a success in some capacity.
So the net here is that if you can optimize your name on Google SEO to go above, Mel Gibson's version of William Wallace, then you have made it. You have truly made it. So, I'm rooting for you because what that means is that science has prevailed a movie. We won't say story because most people don't know the real story or they just think it's a fictional movie as well. But one of the things that I will say is that if we can have science on the top of every SEO search on Google, man, we've done a great job. So I'm rooting for you, man.
Jeez, I don't anticipate myself to go above Mel Gibson, but I'd say if I can get within somewhere in the first 3 pages of a Google search, I'll be happy.
I'm sure you settle. It's like Mel Gibson, then Dr. William Wallace, and then Sir William Wallace. There we go.
I'll take that.
I love it. Well, man, I want to tell a little bit of the background and backstory of how I found you and how I was exposed to your work. And then I'd love to hear a little bit about your story, what got you into this, a little bit of your drive, and then obviously, we'll jump into plenty of content in our time. But, one of the things that I love doing is that, I really try to minimize my time on social media. And I get it. I work in the social media, I work in the health and wellness influencing sector. I own a health technology company. I do have to dabble in social media, but I've noticed a pattern for me, and this is a great kind of notion to the book by Dr. Anna Lemke, which is Dopamine Nation, which is phenomenal, is I'm one of the people, just like everyone is susceptible to kind of engaging in these high dopamine, pleasure principle type behaviors, which is social media. And if I get on it and don't basically cap myself, I'm a mindless scroller on social media. It's just the way that it works. And, I think a lot of people can relate to that. But one of the things that I've had to do is recognize that. And so I really limit kind of who I follow and then how much time I spend on there. But one of the times, I don't know if it was a post that came from Andrew Huberman or someone else, maybe Ben Pekulski or Ben Greenfield, someone had posted something that you had done. And it was on neurotransmitters and neurotransmitter depletion, especially with supplementation. And I saw that, and I was like, oh man, it was a cool chart. It was this flow graph, and we'll upload everything onto our show notes. And I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta go follow this dude. So I got onto your Instagram page, and dude, it was candy. And so I admit, I stayed way too long on Instagram compared to what my cap was, because I was just I loved that what you were doing is you were providing amazing science in a pithy yet potent manner. It was beautiful graphics, and it was just really easy to understand, talking and discussing a super complex topic. And so that kind of got me sparked a little bit. And so I added you. I was like, okay, he's one of the guys I'm following because I just loved the valuable, potent information you were putting out there on Instagram. And so I'd love for you, now that I've kind of shared how I found you, to tell us a little bit about your background. So what was your Ph.D. in? What's your background in research? How did you get involved in this type of study, in brain health, sports and health longevity? Give us a little bit of the background there, man.
Yeah, sure. So for people that do know me, they know that my undergraduate degree had nothing to do with what I'm doing now. I had chosen a degree where I could basically just graduate on time because I spent, my late teens and early 20s kind of partying partying and sliding my way through college. And it wasn't
pretty much every college student that hears this knows exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And obviously I'm playing Monday morning quarterback and just thinking about all the things that I could have accomplished in that time period had I utilized those 4 years appropriately. But I mean, all things for a reason, you would like to think, right? So anyways, once I realized that I was never going to use that degree, I had spent a year and a half outside of school, basically working and trying to acquire prerequisites to get into graduate school for something that I actually wanted to do. And I was really interested in the exercise sciences. And, I wasn't sure if it was that or athletic training or PT. But, excuse me, I had gotten accepted to the University of Tampa exercise and nutrition science. And that was where I had elected to go. I went down there. I started working in the lab. I tried out a lot of different things. I tried, to work with some of the athletic training people. I interned in the strength and conditioning department. And then, everybody at the time wanted to be in the lab there. So when I had made known I wanted to be in the lab, everybody's like, well, yeah, I mean, everybody comes here, and wants to be in the lab, but nobody really takes you seriously because with research, once you're in it, you realize how kind of tedious things are. And, once a lot of people get started and they realize this really isn't as flashy as I thought, or exciting as I thought it was, and then they drop out. So it wasn't until I think my second semester there was my thesis semester. So because there was rolling admissions, so I went into my thesis semester, and at the end of that semester, I presented my thesis, and it was good enough to get the attention of the people who were opening and closing doors to the lab, and they're basically, cool, like, you're in, show us what you got. And so after a while, I had kind of worked my way up the I guess leadership hierarchy there, and I was running studies. I was overseeing different lab operations, helping train new techs coming in, and then excuse me. And it actually was interestingly my neuromuscular physiology class where I really started to make connections with how the brain interacts with muscle function, and then also how those two things communicate bidirectionally, and how sensory input affects all of that and influences movement, blah blah blah. So my initial background was really in like motor learning and neuromuscular physiology, and I was actually highly interested in biomechanics at the time. So I spent a good portion of my start in these things from about 2015 to early 2018 studying muscular physiology and biomechanics. And then, but it was that class that really got me interested in the brain. And I remember my professor from that class, he's like one of the most intelligent people I'd ever met in my life. He was an exercise physiologist from Brazil. And I remember having several conversations with him about the brain. He's like, if I could go back and do it all over again, I'd do neuroscience. It's just like, it fascinates me. And
I've heard that from so many people, and I think one of the most fascinating things about it is that that is one of the main frontiers or areas of study that still is just almost basically untapped. I mean, we've tapped into a lot, but probably when we look back in the next, let's say 50 years, we're gonna be like, dude, we didn't know crap about the brain from what we know now. So it's just such an amazing frontier that's we have so much to learn. So I get the pull that people have, to neuroscience, because that's what my pull was. Is that it's man, this is an area of human behavior, brain function, brain health, and longevity that we just haven't explored, and I'd love to be a part of it.
It influences, just so much of everything that we're involved in. I have my interests. Really, they relate to learning and psychology and human behavior. And really all of those things tie back to the brain in some capacity. And so to me, and also, what I was involved in at the time was more like sports nutrition. And a lot of the research we were doing was geared towards sports nutrition. So I was involved in the usage of supplements for different modalities. But I was kind of bound to sports nutrition early on. And this was actually, so this was back, say 2015, 2016. This was kind of when nootropics started to become a buzzword.
Oh yeah.
And
sure.
so that's
is that the modafinil time? Was that when was the Silicon Valley modafinil explosion? I feel like that was in like the.
It was around that time. Modafinil might have started blowing up a little bit before that, but this is when like commercially people really started to hear about these things.
Yeah.
And so I remember people bringing these things, like other graduate students bringing some things into the lab, and we're like, oh, like what are these? And you just kind of like start playing with them, and you're like, I'm curious about what they start reading up on things, and that was, excuse me, that took me down the proverbial rabbit hole, and then so pretty quickly, I, from firsthand experience, I realized some of the positive influences these things could have, but also a lot of the negative ones. And the more you educate yourself in these things, and the more you experience them, then hopefully you're not one of those people. But I think that, if I've become very proficient in these things, it's because I was highly inefficient and not proficient for quite a period of time, and I suffered the consequences for it. And to this day, still do to a degree.
Yeah, that's an interesting statement. I mean, one of the things I've been a part of, the health and wellness field, and I guess you could say the so-called biohacking field for a long time now, and it's really interesting the mentality that a lot of health optimization, longevity biohackers, or said biohackers, like it's interesting to watch their mentality, because it's basically like, I'm going to throw everything under the kitchen sink at this, and I'm just going to be kind of like this N of one tester of everything. And they go from like, maybe not feeling good to feeling like pretty good. And then they're like, well, now we just throw more at it. And then they start like, this is not working, or I'm feeling worse. But they keep on just doing it and doing it and doing it without much of an understanding of what they're putting into their body, and kind of the behavior they're engaging in, like how it can significantly impact them. So I'm kind of one of those people, man. Like when I heard about this field of nootropics, and dude, and listen, and I want to be very clear to the listeners here, I was one of the people that, like, I had a really good background in neuroscience, in neuropsychology, and the way the brain functions and operates with exogenous substances. I had a pretty good background, especially compared to most people in the world. And I still was like, oh, I'm a biohacker. Like, I just want to take every nootropic there is, and I'm going to mix them, I'm going to match them. And dude, it had me feeling like garbage until I learned about it. And then I started to be able to optimize things and utilize them effectively, and like I like the word that you used, efficiently. So is that what you're referring to? Like when you say kind of like, were you kind of like one of those like, hey, I'm going to be the lab rat here and test stuff out on me? Or is it more like, oh, I didn't realize, or I didn't understand this stuff, and then I got into the research and then became more aware of it? Like, what was that personal journey like for you?
So I think the personal journey for me was more because at the time my work requirements had me focused, like say, in the exercise sciences, but my interests, like a lot of my peak interests, were more in supplementation, but also brain function. So I was studying really the different functions of the brain at the time. Because also now, if we move forward a little bit, I was going through my Ph.D. and I got my Ph.D. through Concordia in Chicago. So it was health and human performance was the degree, and my primary focuses were neuro and nutrition, because in programs like that, your focuses are like what you're studying and like what your dissertation is leading to. And I was working in a lab from 2015 to 2018, and then from 2018 to early this year, excuse me, I went to go work for the company Life Extension down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And then that's when I entered more of the health and longevity space. And so I was also highly involved in designing research for the clinical lab there, because they have their own clinical lab. So throughout this entire period of me working and doing my dissertation, I was always involved in lab work, excuse me, and I was always surrounded by PhDs from different fields. At Life Extension, I had, I would say, as far as academic tenure goes, I was at the low end of the totem pole where I worked. Like, I was still in the middle of my PhD. The person in the office to the right of me was a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Miami. the person to the left of me was a Ph.D. in molecular biology from Jamaica, or something like that. And then the people across the hall from me, like it was all the same thing. So I was always surrounded by people who were much more, I would say, educated than I was in different fields. But, excuse me, we were all tied together on the same team that was really on the frontier of supplemental nutrition. Like not only were we, it's a supplement company, but the product development that we were involved in was really concerned with finding new and novel modalities and creating different technologies to deliver nutrition to people in an effective way. Like some of the things that we were doing, it's funny because I actually was at a conference a couple months ago and somebody had said to me, like, oh, like life extension, like, yeah, like, and this person's situated more in sports nutrition. They're like, yeah, they're like, they don't really do a whole lot of like new interesting stuff, do they? And I was like, it just reflected the disconnect to me because like, no, some of the things they do are so high level and so far ahead of what everybody else does that commercially people don't grasp it. And that, and that might've been maybe like a marketing thing that they need to work on. But I was highly fortunate to have, I say, like my start within the dietary supplement industry with that company because they're known for their scientific rigor and all the experience and knowledge that I was able to accumulate from people who were much more intelligent and experienced than I was, and all these different field perspectives. But excuse me, all throughout that time, now entering the field of longevity and general health, now I was becoming more learned on nutrition and how it affects not just sports performance and muscle function, but brain function, liver function, pancreatic function, and so I was exposed to a new depth and breadth of knowledge, and the whole time exploring and studying these interests of mine further. And again, like I said, like prior to, I think that I had done myself a disservice for, not using exogenous substances appropriately. And then because of that, was having to try to retroactively then experiment on myself to figure out, okay, now how can I try to get myself to return to some kind of baseline that one might consider normal?
Yeah, it's for me, and it sounds like for you too. Though, like there has to be like this level of deconstructing because I had this kind of like idea. For me, it's like, well, I'm feeling really good now. I'm ready to optimize. So optimizing must just mean that when I throw everything at the kitchen sink at it, I hear whatever a health influencer or biohacker saying, hey, I tried this is really great, and then what do people do? They go out and buy it because in the end, like supplementation for a lot of people is easier than doing some other like health behaviors because we're talking about taking a pill. Well, it's funny, I'm sure you know this, that the research has actually indicated that even with supplementation, like a lot of people find that to be a difficult behavior. So that's where like, oh man, now we know like we're truly like in some trouble if like taking a supplement, or let's even go in the pharmacological route, taking medication is difficult for people. Like, how are we going to get them like exercising or engaging in whatever other type of health behavior? But a lot of it for me was again deconstructing like my thoughts, and it brings me to a question that I have for you that I'm just genuinely kind of curious as to your take on this. I feel like there's such a dichotomy out there on viewpoints in regards to supplementation. You've got like the longevity, the health and wellness people, like the health and human optimization, biohacking community, which is like gung-ho, I'll take everything under the sun right now. Like, I don't even care. You don't have to tell me any mechanism of action. You don't even have to tell me the name of it. Just put it in front of me. It gives me a longer, better life. I'll take it. Quote unquote, longer, better life. And you've got like the opposite end of the spectrum of people who are like, nope, like supplement industry, they're just out there to kind of like screw us all over with marketing. Like, it's all just a bunch of sugar pill. Like, it doesn't actually work. And I'm like, whoa, like, is there a middle ground here? Like, have you seen that kind of like, how do you reconcile that? Like that balance there? Because that's like a really weird one to me that we have like, almost like, I won't say the conventional medical side who's like on the anti-supplement side. Yeah. And then you've got like the biohacking health optimization side who's like on the anti-pharmacological side. Yeah. But it feels like that dichotomy. Is that something that you see, something you've experienced? And then how do you reconcile that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I think that a lot of us, depending on where you kind of like sit, like I think some of us, you look at it as a spectrum with a hard line drawn in the middle, and some of us might lean like left or right of center. But I would like to think that it sounds like you might be similar to me in this vein, is that you understand the importance and the necessity of modern medicine, but try to see like when is it most beneficial and relevant, and then also when is it more practical and useful to use more of a natural remedies on people. But excuse me, I don't think that anything is as simple as big pharma is Satan, and the FDA is just out to make a buck, and the supplement industry is unregulated, which is one of the weirdest things that when people say it to me, the supplement industry is not regulated. I'm like, actually, the supplement industry is a lot more regulated than most of your food in the grocery store is.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah.
And most people don't know that. I mean, and sure, I'm pro supplementation. I love learning about these things. I believe in it. I believe that in the appropriate context, and when used in an intelligent manner, I believe in the efficacy of natural supplementation. That's why I do what I do. I don't, a lot of people say on Instagram or something may not necessarily know what I do, because I don't sell anything on Instagram, because I don't really need to. It's not really my primary motive. But excuse me, but being involved for the past 7 years in the supplement industry in some capacity, and I've I would say the constructs or the structures that I've worked in the most are product development, compliance, and quality. And being so involved in those things, then you really do actually understand the nuance of all the different governing bodies and where they play a role versus where they don't. And actually, excuse me, the FDA in a lot of cases, right? If you're a part of the Council for Responsible Nutrition or the Natural Products Association, which kind of act as the voice of the people when it comes to dietary supplements, a lot of times those regulatory bodies, those agencies are fighting the FDA for people's right to supplement with certain things. And we see the most recent example of that is the FDA trying to take N-acetylcysteine off of the shelves, and both the Council for Responsible Nutrition and Natural Products Association basically putting in citizens petitions to fight that. And then as early as last week, I believe the Natural Products Association has sued the FDA because of their response to those citizens petitions, because most of us who, again, are knowledgeable about these things know the benefit of something like N-acetylcysteine for your average consumer. It has a long history of safe and effective use for a bunch of different conditions. And so we have different bodies that fight for the people against the FDA to not regulate so harshly on some of these things. But if you also go into the grocery store and then look at food on the other side of things, if you go through the entire produce section, I guarantee that nobody had to test that food coming in for pesticides or herbicides. And, here at our manufacturing facility, we test everything that comes in the door for those things. Right. So
that's a good point.
Just people just aren't educated in these, and it's difficult to expect them to be too, because everybody's, people have jobs and families, but a lot of things that people say are just completely opinion based and not based off of much knowledge about matters they're speaking on.
No, it's a great point, or it's just hearsay, right? I mean, people hear something on whatever, Fox News or CNN or whatever news outlet you get your media from, and they just kind of take it as fact, and they say, "Oh yeah, I heard, whoever, Tucker Carlson." I'm going to get sued by Tucker Carlson. So the supplement industry is not regulated, or you have Rachel Maddow. I'm going to go take two opposites. So the supplement industry is not regulated, and then therefore people just take that and they spread the word. You know how things happen, and this happens on social media. It happens in just grocery store conversations without them fully digging in. And I think that you're right. People aren't going to have the full amount of time to devote to studying things like you or like me or like others who are professionals and experts in the field. We get that, but also too, we do have a duty to make sure that we're at least looking into some things and at least getting a little bit of quality education on those things. And that's why, again, I love the fact that on your Instagram, I can hop on there and get really good information with scientific citation, something that has been through the rigors, so that we can kind of, fact check you instead of you just saying like, hey, like, don't do this, don't do that, which you don't really do that on your Instagram, like a don't do this, don't do that type thing. But it's something that you kind of lay it out there and you say, well, this is what science has to say, which is really good. I mean, it helps to kind of like, I viewed kind of your work as a means to help move us back towards the middle, so that we can, not be on these kind of polar ends of the spectrum. This is not like, politics, but it's becoming kind of like politics in the field of like integrative health or functional medicine, and in the field of allopathic or conventional medicine. It's like these two entities are trying to like fight each other. And it's like, maybe we should kind of look at like the middle ground here, what I hear you say. So I think it's a good point. One of the things that I've heard this argument for so many years, and I'd love to hear your take on it, because again, I think you come from a really balanced view on this, Will, is that I've heard this notion that, listen, like, haven't we evolved like as human beings to be able to get everything that we need from food, or from kind of the things that are like here on earth, and instead of having to like take something in supplemental form? Like, what's the need for supplements if we can just get it from food? Like, are you someone that believes, yeah, you can get everything that you need from food, or are there certain circumstances where you can't do that? Or like, what's your take on that? Because again, I've heard some arguments for, against, and I just love to hear yours.
Yeah, so this is really a multi-prong matter, because I think nobody is going to argue the idea that food today tends to contain less nutrients generally than food however many years ago. And we hear that as a commonly made
due
argument.
To like degraded soil and things like that.
Yeah, and that's
like the state knocking shit out.
Right, and that argument that's a good argument to make for for why we may not be able to get everything we need from food nowadays. That's just part of the argument. I think that we also have more access to different kinds of foods today than we did 100 years ago. So, we can regularly go to the grocery store and pick something up that's, traditionally found in South America or in Asia, which we could not have done X amount of years ago. And so we can actually fill the gaps in our nutritional needs, getting sources of nutrients from other places that we couldn't previously do. So there's a lot of arguments on both sides that you can use to make really a cogent points for your argument. But I think that there are different things to consider that affect, I would say, general nutrient status that a lot of people don't include in those arguments. And one of those is being that we probably live in a time nowadays where we experience, right, and I'm not even sure that I can make this claim, so maybe you can tell me what you think, but it seems as though we live in a society where we experience more cumulative stress than we did a couple 100 years ago. And
absolutely.
People you become nutrient depleted under conditions of stress and illness, and we tend to be more.
How so?
So, excuse me.
I know that can kind of take us in a different direction, but I think it's a great question that a lot of people are probably thinking, like, I've never heard of that, so how so?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways. I mean, if you're stressed out, then you have increased activity of either your innate or adaptive immune system. Those things require nutrients. Cortisol itself triggers the synthesis and the metabolism of different chemicals in the body, be those neurotransmitters or different hormones in the periphery. And all of these things require nutrients. All of these things require antioxidants, which can oxidize and then need to be reduced. And those require reducing agents, which require more nutrients. And then also,
would you say, Will, that a lot of that, so let's say kind of if stress is the mediating variable, it's the factor that's kind of causing the depletion of a lot of these things that you've mentioned, is it predominantly due, in your opinion, because of the massive amounts of inflammation that high stress or chronic stress causes, that then wreaks havoc on the entire physiology?
Oh, certainly. I mean, inflammation by proxy it can cause and be exacerbated by increased glycolysis in different cells of the immune system, like macrophages. But inflammation itself can deplete almost every nutrient that I think that we could sit and list off here. Not only that, but inflammation is going to affect somebody's absorption capacity of nutrients that they're trying to take in. So, I mean, you can tie, I know it's a cliche saying, but you can pretty much tie inflammation back to the etiology of almost any condition that we can list off here. And I would say that probably in the society or the state of things that we live in today, then even considering low-grade inflammation, which can be caused by or a byproduct of so many things, just day-to-day stressors, then say cumulatively, like we don't tend to think about the impact that that's having on our bodies over the course of a day to days to weeks. Like I think yesterday I was actually thinking about this. The day was, filled with so many small stressors that I remember thinking at the end of the day that I just felt completely exhausted and being like, I felt very high strung all day and I felt incredibly depleted. And I was like, man, like I eat as much as I normally do. I tend to eat pretty, say, a healthy diet. I think I get plenty of nutrients from various sources, but also realizing that the past couple of days had also been like that. And even though I had thought that I had gotten sufficient sleep as well, I mean, just every day with little stress here, little stress here, little stress here, you don't tend to think about the isolated incidents very much, but when you have one after the other, then those become cumulative and pretty much I guess you call it the allostatic load on the body increases. And it's just like adding bricks into a backpack and you just walking around and not paying attention to the added bricks. And then all of a sudden you're just like, wow, like this is really heavy. Like what's going on? You realize like, there's a lot of bricks back here. I should probably figure out ways to start unloading these.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the key thing we do here at Hanu Health, right? Is we want to help people to become more self-aware of when they're experiencing their stress response, their autonomic nervous system going haywire, and then self-regulate it. And we teach so many different means or ways of increasing kind of our adaptability as well as our resiliency to stress. And we focus a lot, on breath work, on exercise, on nutrition. But I think that one thing that, again, we get so many questions about, like, how can we optimize supplementation? And I know, like, it's funny because we were talking prior to recording about how, like, I will get emails. I can't even tell you how many emails that I've gotten over the past, maybe let's say 3 to 4 years about, like, should I be taking 5-HTP? Because I feel a little bit down. I'm a little depressed. And I heard somebody say that, like, this is probably a serotonin issue. And so therefore I must take 5-HTP. And they do it, not under me telling them they should, but they do it. And they're like, well, I don't feel anything, or I feel crummy, or I feel, you fill in the blank. And so there's just so many, like, myths here that I think we need to dispel. And so I think it's a great transition time for us to talk about that. So again, what are the role of, and we can either start with supplements or we can start with kind of like one of the other things, maybe if we want to talk about like the etiology of things, is like, where do we start, number one, and like determining kind of like what we should do from a supplementation standpoint? Because you said, well, there can, be mineral depletion, I'm assuming, vitamin depletion, kind of all of these things that happen when we're experiencing these chronic states of stress, the sympathetic nervous system's amped up. So like, where do we even start with this? Do you have a recommendation? Like, do we need to get assessed for our mineral, levels, for our vitamin levels and have that as a basis? Or can we just say, hey, supplement it up, like, let's go, 5-HTP, I'm depressed, said depressed, let me go get 5-HTP. Where's the starting place here?
Yeah, so, excuse me, I think that, and again, I understand that depending on who you ask here, you could get, several different and also wildly different answers, because there really is no right answer. So I think what I try to do is, now there's a lot of good answers, but the way that I try to look at these things is from a standpoint of practicality. Because, excuse me, I have to try to think about this from the perspective of, I try to use my parents because they're kind of like the typical consumer. Like, they're not, like, neither of my parents are obese or chronically ill, excuse me, but they're, I would call them part of the general population where they don't exercise very much. They don't like taking pills, which is actually, that is very, very consistent across the general population. You realize that if you start, if you're part of like producing a dietary supplement, if you're using pills or tablets, adherence starts to go down dramatically after 2 pills, because people just hate taking pills. And like people like me, I'm like, what? I mean, if I had to, I'll take 12 pills in one handful. Right. I don't care. But generally speaking, you have to look at it from the standpoint of the general consumer and people whose health may not be, I would say, consider like as good as mine, because like I'm fortunate enough to be knowledgeable about several things in Sarah. So like I do the best I can with exercise. I do the best I can with my sleep, even though these things aren't optimal at all times. They certainly aren't, because life is a thing. But, I try to meditate as frequently as I can. My nutrition's on point. I think I have my supplementation on point. And so not everybody is me, and certainly not everybody is you. So the best, the best way to look at this is through the lens of the typical American who does not have sufficient knowledge to be optimal in all cases. And so I think practicality is the best thing to do. And so with that being said, like, sure, you can go get like you can go get like a vitamin panel done, and you can go get gene testing done, and those are kind of all like. But some people can't even afford that, and some people's insurance won't cover it. And even then, you know that a lot of times when looking at different vitamins and blood levels, that may not be indicative of a deficiency or adequacy or your usefulness. Exactly. Now, it can be one thing used with several other things to come up with a possibility of what's happening. In somebody's body, but most people just aren't going to take that route. So what do? Right. And so I think what you have to do is look at some of the molecules that are absolutely necessary for human health and to sustain life. And then we can talk about things.
Yeah, what are those?
So we can talk about things as general, as general as protein, which I know that's kind of a topic that's like beaten like a dead horse, like at least in our circles. Yeah.
But it's not sexy anymore, right? It used to be like, oh yeah, let's talk about protein. That's sexy. Now people are like, nah. Let's get over the other stuff. But it's such a low-hanging fruit for everybody.
I mean, excuse me, I can't stop this cough. So I'm sitting here talking about how healthy I am, and my lungs are about to come out of my throat. But I mean, if you're not getting in enough protein, then vitamin A, cysteine, vitamin B vitamins, vitamin E, vitamin C, all of those deficiencies can ensue from not getting enough protein. You're like, well, that's odd because protein is protein and may not contain many vitamins within the material of the protein. Be like, well, if you're not getting enough cysteine, then that's the rate limiting enzyme or the rate limiting substrate for glutathione synthesis. And if you don't have enough glutathione, then you're not able to adequately reduce oxidized vitamin C back into its usable antioxidant form. Now you have a vitamin C deficiency, which would also exacerbate a glutathione deficiency because vitamin C is also used to reduce recycled glutathione. So you just see the cascade of events that can happen from not getting enough protein in your diet.
Yeah. Then the person would let's say they get a panel and they say, oh, yeah, I'm vitamin C deficient because of the pathway you just told me about. It didn't start there. It started somewhere else that then led to a depletion or, the degradation of vitamin C levels. But then people will be like, oh, and especially in the functional medicine world, it's like vitamin C is deficient, so therefore let me just take a vitamin C supplement. Is that the right route, or are we missing something and should go back to the starting place?
Now, I think that this plays into the totality of the answer I was going to give to this, is looking at all of the things that are necessary for human health. And I think that also the important thing to be mindful of here is that we need to be honest with ourselves. And when I say that, what I mean is that let's look at the actual pillars of human health, being nutrition, sleep, exercise. You can throw in meditation, although it's not necessary for survival. I don't think anybody would argue that, doing it is not helpful in some way or can be. So assuming that you're honest with yourself, and all these things, I'm doing the best I can with my nutrition, I'm doing the best with my sleep. And when I say being honest, I don't mean it's well, I go to bed at 11:30 every night and I got to get up at 5 a.m. for work. I'm doing the best I can to fall asleep. But you get home from work and then you take care of all your duties and you make dinner and you clean up. And then you sit on the couch.
Watch Netflix for 3 hours.
You sit on the couch from 9 p.m. to 11:30 and watch Netflix. Like, are you really being honest with yourself that you're doing the best you can for your sleep? So if you actually make sure you're getting enough protein, you're getting enough, healthy fats in your diet, and you're also getting enough basically total energy. You're getting enough sleep. Maybe you're meditating here and there. That one you can kind of put on the table or leave it off or whatever. But you're exercising frequently, but not so frequently that you're kind of burning yourself out. Then if you can honestly say, yes, I'm doing the best I can. Now, also, I understand that like life happens, and like some people have babies, they might have a sleep condition, so they may not under their normal conditions be able to optimize something like sleep. But now we can look at supplementation, because it's called supplementation and not substitution for a reason.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to substitute supplements for sleep. Right now, supplements can help to plug holes when situations without them are not what we would call optimized. So if somebody does have a condition that's not allowing them to get enough deep sleep or a long duration of sleep, or they do have a newborn, then they may need to take some supplements that help them get to sleep a little bit faster, or maybe help them get the most out of the sleep they are getting. But I do think that when we look at where do we start, now again, you have your bases covered and you think like, I'm doing the best I can in these areas, so like I shouldn't have, say like I shouldn't be like protein deficient, or I'm getting enough healthy fats, so on and so forth. Then you look at the vitamins and the minerals that are necessary to sustain human life and for biological processes. You don't have to get super nuanced and be like, I'm going to start taking all these cognitive enhancers, and I'm going to start taking these really cool herbs that I heard affect your physiology like this. But like, why don't there's nothing wrong with those things. But before we get, all complicated, let's look at the things that are necessary for biological function. So you have, vitamins, actually the term vitamin came from the term vital amine in 1912. And that was after some of the B vitamins were discovered, and an amine is a derivative of ammonia. And so these were called vital amines because they were found to be, these are necessary to sustain biological function. But then in 1920, basically the guy who had discovered these vital amines found out that not all vitamins were amines. Some of them were amides. And so the term went from vitamins with an E at the end to vitamins. They dropped the E off. But
didn't know that. Great history lesson.
But that's where the term vitamins came from. These things are that's what we classify as a vitamin, is something that is necessary to sustain biological function in life. So the good thing about those things is, under normal circumstances, it can be difficult to take too much of these things. That's not to say that does not happen, but you can take a little bit more than your regular RDA and not have to worry about severe side effects or consequences in most cases. So you don't necessarily have to go get a vitamin panel as long as you're not taking 10,000 to 20,000 IUs of vitamin A every day. Then you don't necessarily have to worry about getting like 1,000 IUs of vitamin A. You're probably not going to sustain any negative side effects from something like that. But of course, all of this is on an individual basis, and you have different people have maybe different genetic mutations, which then adds a layer of complexity to, okay, well, what vitamins might I be more susceptible to having deficiencies in, and then what effects are going to be downstream of that. But I do think that before we get super complicated, let's look at the things that we absolutely need to sustain general well-being in life, and we can focus on those. And then once we have that situated and you feel like, okay, like I'm actually feeling pretty good, like I don't feel wonderful, but I feel way better than I did. Like, okay, now at least we have something that we're working with. And now if you can get vitamin panels or you can get assessed for certain nutrient deficiencies, then great. I think if the option's there, then that has to be something that's considered. But practicality and simplicity before just like, throwing in the kitchen sink or like taking the biohacker approach, as you've mentioned.
Yeah, indeed. This might be a bit of a loaded question, and feel free to answer as you will. Is there any supplementation out there that you think is pretty universal or ubiquitous, or that basically you can say almost everybody, if not everybody, like should be taking this? Or is that not even a thing?
No, I think that can be a thing. Like there are things that I do think that typically, regardless of what, now, again, I can't say regardless of somebody's condition because there's so many different nuanced conditions. You say in some cases, a small amount of vitamin B1 could stimulate tumor growth, but a high amount of vitamin B1 can suppress tumor growth. So how does that help somebody? But I do think under most cases, there are some things that people can take that will, generally speaking, confer benefit rather than any kind of negative consequences, regardless of, say, a condition somebody has, but also then if you add in medication that somebody might be taking for a certain condition, then that would probably change my answer here. But, and it's a very short list, but I do think that generally high quality omega-3s, and I know that there's, for whatever reason, actually I know the arguments, I just don't know where they came from, why there's a stigma against omega-3s floating around the internet. And that would be a completely different topic to roll off into, but
do you have a dosing, and does EPA DHA in your research matter, like kind of the ratio, and then just dosing in general, or is that something that's not really necessarily agreed upon?
So excuse me, it's actually, so the data on that is kind of, I would say that the data on that actually is not as straightforward as people think it is, but EPA does seem to confer more cardiovascular benefit and also have more of an impact on depression comparatively to DHA. But that doesn't mean that DHA itself is useless. I mean, most of the polyunsaturated fatty acids in our brain are DHA. Excuse me. And DHA itself does have, its recycling rate. This is the case in rodents. I don't think we know what it is in humans, but we just kind of assume that it's similar, although the number might be different. The recycling rate of DHA is 137 times faster than the recycling rate of EPA. So our bodies go through a lot of DHA, but we're pretty efficient at actually recycling and reusing it. But DHA is necessary for the stability of membrane integrity, and then especially in the brain, as well as like signal sending and processing, so propagation speed down an axon, because myelin sheath are largely made up of DHA. So that's not so. So I'm not saying that somebody should take a certain amount of EPA versus DHA. I do generally think that for most people that you don't need to stress on the ratio, and that if you're getting somewhere, now this is a perfect case scenario, you're getting between 3 and 6 grams of omega-3s, that now within that DHA and EPA are maybe close to a 1-to-1, but they don't have to be, right, then you're probably doing better than most people.
Cool, that makes sense. So we got, all right, so we're talking about, again, universal supplements. So high quality omega-3 is kind of number one. And then what are the other ones? I know you said it's a pretty short list.
So vitamin D, that's another one. I know that we've all...
With vitamin K, because I feel like everybody's saying like it should be with vitamin K. Some people are like, no, it doesn't need to be. What's your take on that?
So this kind of depends on, like, now it's not completely necessary if you're I would say a typically healthy person with a good diet, then I don't think that one is necessary. And I mean, I know why people say that, because the hormone or the active form of vitamin D, calcitriol, is called that because it helps absorb calcium in the gut. And then obviously vitamin K2 basically carboxylates matrix GLA protein and prevents arterial calcification by helping shuttle that calcium into bone where we do want most of it. So there's the rationale behind that. Is it necessary to do together? I mean, unless you're taking in incredibly high doses of calcium and incredibly high doses of vitamin D, then I don't think that it's an absolute necessity. However, I have like my grandfather is diabetic, and in a case like that, like my grandma was like, yeah, can he take vitamin D? And like, yeah, he can take vitamin D, but I would take vitamin K with it, because I think he's also taking calcium, I believe, because of his brittle bones at his age. So so under conditions like that, I'm like, yeah, vitamin K can be very synergistic with that. But if I take vitamin D every day, but do I take vitamin K2 every day? No, I don't think it's necessary for me.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That's good to know. All right. So we've got omega-3s. We've got vitamin D. Anything else on that list?
Creatine.
Oh, I love it. And are we talking about just 5 grams of monohydrate, or do you have a specialty type of creatine? I mean, there's so many things out there. There's different esters. There's you name it out there. What say you?
Yeah. So excuse me. So creatine monohydrate is going to be fine for most people. I think most of us are privy to the information that no other forms of creatine fare better than creatine monohydrate. And what's most, the most important thing with creatine supplementation is that it's used consistently. But I believe our bodies, we metabolize about 2 grams of creatine every day. So we really only need 2 grams of creatine to make up for what we're losing. But that doesn't mean that we've saturated our stores. So, you can there's different modalities. You can do the 20 grams per day for a couple days loading phase. There actually is science to back that protocol, in terms of saturating your stores more quickly. And then after that, lowering the dose to a 3 to 5 gram maintenance dose. Now, if you're not somebody who wants to be taking in a high dose of this, then you could just take 2 grams of creatine every day. If you're not much of a meat eater, or you're not sure how much creatine you're getting through, say, meat or red meat consumption, then you could take in 2 grams and just make up for what you're losing every day. Or you can take 3 to 5 grams for a period of a couple of weeks and saturate creatine stores that way. And then, and then drop down to, say, a 2 to 3 gram maintenance dose. And, to this point in time, there's no evidence that long-term supplementation of creatine has any harmful implications. Everything that you see, you see more and more data coming out to support creatine's use for all kinds of things way outside of sports nutrition. I was reading something last month about creatine's ability to be used by cytotoxic T cells as, basically support their tumor suppressing action, because when these T cells basically raise in activity, then their de novo synthesis of creatine goes down, but they can import creatine, and they use creatine for energy as they're basically attacking tumor or cancerous cells. So, and that's why we see it being commercially becoming even more and more popular. The company that I'm with right now, we sell creatine, and creatine sales have been going up exponentially higher than what we thought they would be this year. And we're selling the what's generally regarded as the purest form of creatine on the market, Creapure, coming out of Germany.
Oh, nice. Yeah, Creapure. So my buddy Ben Greenfield, his Keon, his company, that's what they use. They just basically repurpose Creapure, and that's the creatine that I use on a daily basis. So that's cool. I'm glad to know that I'm using. I trusted Ben when he said, "Hey, this is the purest stuff out there," but I trust you even more on this one. So Ben's gonna listen to this. What in the world? That's awesome.
So it's weird. It's I would tell my parents that, my mom, I was like, "Mom, you should take creatine," and she'd be like, "Why would I take that? I'm not a bodybuilder."
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Well, that's the notion, right? That's what the next question I was going to ask you. The paradigm has been, creatine. That's muscle protein synthesis, ATP. Utilization within the muscular tissue to help develop big and bulky muscles. So I was curious because, a lot of people are going to think that, just like your mom would. But you've got this on your short list of 3 that everybody could benefit from. So it's obviously not just for the bodybuilders. So why do you think it is kind of like that one that really everybody should be taking on a daily basis?
There's just
for the ATP reasons.
Excuse me, what was that last part?
So like the ATP synthesis reasons, or like the energy reasons, or what do you think is kind of why everybody would benefit, or maybe it is for muscle protein synthesis? I can get it out there.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's some evidence suggesting that it may support muscle protein synthesis, but primarily, so many different tissues of the body use it as an energy substrate, and they use it to support cellular bioenergetics because different cells have different biological activity, and they consume, say, different varying degrees of ATP and resources. But some of these like high energy turnover cells of the body, like brain cells or liver cells, even cardiac cells, use creatine in some capacity for supporting energy. And actually, it's energy production by a cell is just the idea of it, I think, is underrated in the in the commercial health space, because it's I believe it's been suggested that a decrease in energy output by a cell, so an inability for a cell to meet its energy needs, is one of the primary factors that causes basically a kill signal. And that signals for the death of that cell. And that's why we see, we hear the words mitochondrial dysfunction a whole lot, implicated in a lot of different diseases. It's, not only is something like that causing, say, a lot of stress and inflammation within a cell, but if a cell is not able to produce enough energy to meet its needs, then that's basically a default signal for the cell to be like, I'm done. Like, put a fork in me.
Right. Interesting. Okay, that's fascinating. I had predicted that you were going to say omega-3s. I had predicted that you were going to say vitamin D. I didn't know and didn't predict creatine, but it makes sense. I think it's a quite useful, underrated longevity supplements, and then just general health and wellness supplements. So I'm glad that you pointed the case there. Well, here's where we're at. We've got probably another 1,000 subjects that I wanted to get through, which just means I'm going to have you on at some other point. I know you've got a hard stop right here, so we'll go ahead and wrap things up. But again, next time I have you on, I want to talk about nootropics. I want to talk about kind of all the brain health stuff. But what I can say, just to kind of whet somebody's what's the I was trying to think of the phrase, whet your interest? That doesn't sound right. No. Well, whatever. Get people interested in your content is to get you over to your Instagram, which is at Dr. William Wallace. That's right?
Correct.
Get on there? Yeah. So I'll link that in. Are you on other social media platforms, or is that your
So I'm on Twitter right now, and that handle's different because Dr. William Wallace is too long. So that's at Will the Wallace. And I'm not incredibly active on Twitter, but I follow a lot.
Is anybody?
Yeah, I follow a lot of research publications. So if I see something interesting, then I'll retweet it. And so if people want to stay up to date with some of the more recent publications in nutrition or brain science, then they can shoot over there if they're interested.
That's cool, man. That's cool. Well, again, we'll link all this in the show notes. If anybody wants to visit, go to hanuhealth.com/podcast. Everything will be there. Again, I'm going to have you on soon because I want to get into all things like nootropics and all the other stuff that I have on my long list of things that I'm going to talk to you about. But, once we get going on a certain topic, we can go forever. So, dude, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on to the Hanu Health Podcast. And, until next time.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
Awesome, man. All right, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in. Again, we'll be back next week for another episode of Hanu Health. You guys take care. Make sure that you avoid all those stressors in life, which is unavoidable, but you manage them well. All right, everybody. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Hanu Health Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. This podcast would not happen without listeners and supporters like you, and the best way to support us and the show is to head on over to iTunes and provide us with a 5-star review. This helps us reach others and spread the good word of breathing and stress resiliency. If we read your 5-star review on air, please reach out to podcast@hanuhealth.com with your name and mailing address, and we will send you some sweet Hanu gear. Until next time, breathe better and stress less.